of the sample by sex, region, and age. We're going to start with income. Along all the waves of survey, the share of people who speak about their income decrease is decreasing. Right now, it is 31%. As always, the reasons higher prices and higher exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble towards foreign currencies. The rest are 27% who have income decrease without the impact of the exchange rate, and the rest have not been impacted by the income decrease in terms of the exchange rate and other factors. Mostly these are the agricultural workers because of the seasonality, and the construction workers and the IT workers. When we speak to households, how they cope with income decrease, it's important to note the trend of saving on food. In the last quarter, it has been decreasing, and this is very good. At the same time, we can see a smaller share of people who delay their regular payments, and as always, the leaders are those who save on leisure. Now, we build the consumer confidence index based on 5 components. The first two are about the economic situation in the country. Here, we do not see a significant change. Still, I would like to note a high share of uncertainty of Belarusian households about the prospects and expectations from the economic situation in the future. And there's a high share of respondents who report that the economic situation has not changed. Therefore, we can see a small positive trend. The same applies to the material standing of families. Again, we can see that the uncertainty of households has been increasing, and the largest share said that the financial standing is still the same. Belarusians are quite optimistic about other components, in particular about the future material standing of the family. 25% believe that it will improve within the next year. Speaking of large purchases, the dynamics has not changed. Only 15% believe that now is a good time to. Only 12% believe that now is a good time to make large purchases, and only 15% believe that right now is a good time to borrow. But we are going to dwell on this when we speak about the growth of consumer lending. Along all the waves of the monitoring, we have been saying that Belarusians appreciate the financial standing of the family better than the financial situation in the country. However, in the recent waves, the distance between these two have been decreasing because of the economic situation in Belarus. The majority of people say that the economic standing of Belarus is either medium, good, or high. According to the Rostat, there are all 5 components in the consumer confidence index, and we can see that this has been following the recovery trend. Russia is minus 13%, and in Belarus it fully stopped, and it is at the previous level. But still, we would like to say that the consumer confidence index in Belarus is better than in Russia after a significant decline after the war started. Comparing CCI between Belarus and the European Union, we should say that Belarusians are incredibly optimistic. Within the last wave of the survey in the EU and in the Eurozone, we can see that it has fallen by 4.5%, and Belarus is still the same. So Belarus is top 6 in the rating of the Consumer Confidence Index. Among top 6 are Estonia, Poland, and Lithuania. Lithuania, again, reaches the positive side of the index, and we will probably catch up. We should say that this consumer confidence index for the EU countries is not seasonally adjusted.
Recording in progress.
It affects the situation. And we can say that the negative outcomes have been observed in some of the cases. I would like to change my slide now. We have additional questions that we pose to respondents. We believe they are relevant, and this block comes from the previous survey wave. We were interested in consumer lending, and we can see that consumer lending has been growing, not only in statistics, but in our survey too. the share of people who applied for a loan within the last half year has increased. And when we ask them whether getting a loan has become easier, 37% believe that this is so, and 42% believe that nothing has changed. When we speak about easiness and loose conditions or simplification, people mean simplification and lower interest rate, and we can see that the interest rate goes down. Right now, it is about 10%. And if we ask all the respondents, what do you think is the interest rate in Belarus? And 11% will say that it is rather low. However, if we ask those who used to get a loan, then they say that this is 1/3. So we cannot say that all households in Belarus believe that right now is the best time to borrow and that the interest rate is low. However, the trend is observed, and we will follow this in the next survey waves. Next block is about the labor market. Every time we pose a question about firings and about concerns about losing a job, in previous survey waves, we had a gap in answers. We had a small number of those who said they were fired, and a high share of people who would say that some of their acquaintances got jobless. It was about concerns, but in this wave, the second indicator is much lower. Right now, we're investigating why. It's not a secret that the number of workers in Belarus is decreasing. The average number of workers drops not only because of the demography. At the same time, we can see that the nominal wage grows and the real salary grows even more if compared to the inflation. If we decompose the nominal wage by levels, then we find out that the salaries grow in all cohorts. Look at that. Green bars are the number of people who get salaries in a certain range. Let's say 152,000 people get a salary of about 2,000 Belarusian rubles per month. And the majority of it is focused in the cohort of from 700,000 to 2,000, and the next cohort is from 2,000 to 3,000. This is the data of 2023. If we compare this to 2022, we can see that those who had a low salary now get a higher salary, and we can see this in the red line. The majority of respondents of our online survey had to they had to report their salary increase, but only 34% of people said so. There are a few reasons why only a third of them reported salary increase. Probably this is because the sample is quite mixed. We have underrepresentation of people with very high salaries because we analyze not only the labor market but everything around. Possibly, we have a hypothesis that the 34% of respondents are those who have high income, initially high income. And when their salaries grow, when they satisfy their basic needs, they can feel the growth of real salaries better. And those people who had a very low salaries, they keep satisfying their basic needs and they have not noticed it. We can have multiple hypotheses. We have wondered why your salary, do you think, has increased? And first of all, people report the decision of management or administrative regulation, and the salary increase not only in me but in my colleagues. But we should say that this is 1/3 of respondents out of the third of those who reported their salary increase. So this share is not that high. The second popular reason is the change of employment and the different system of salaries and bonuses in their companies. Respondents do not fully agree with the official statistics on the salary increase, but mostly they agree with the thesis on the shortage of staff. 35 43% of them are reporting that there is a shortage of personnel, the top one answer is the potential workers are not satisfied with low salaries. Second is potential workers are not satisfied with high labor, high load at work. And then the next is the qualification lack. Only 23% of respondents said that this is because people migrated, and firing of people was the reason reported by only 18% of respondents. Now, conclusions are the Consumer Confidence Index and its components remained at the level of the previous survey wave. We do not see significant changes. At the same time, the share of respondents who reported a decrease in income continues to decline, and we can see a structural change in the situation of the labor market. Instead of unemployment, there is a shortage of workers reported by respondents, 43% of them, and the level of consumer lending continues to grow, but we keep monitoring this and other factors. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Violetta. And our next presentation is on how enterprises fill themselves, and today we pass on the floor to Radzivon Marozau to speak about SMEs. Thank you very much, Olga. In your presentation, you've already marked it, and I will continue this trend because we can see in the SMEs sector what Violetta observed in the household sector, but we will provide the details now. Could you please zoom in? As an introduction, I'd like to say that we have not altered the methodology. If compared to the previous survey wave, we still have the sample of 300 SMEs. They represent 4 pillar activities: industrial production, construction, wholesale, and trade, and other activities. Meaning companies in the services sector, starting from IT to transportation. Now, regarding how we organize the surveys, first of all, we are focused on the owners and top managers of companies, and they participate in our online survey. For some reason, I cannot change slides. I can see only half of it. Now it looks better. Thank you. So let's start. Our key indicator is the composite BCI index. As you can see, this indicator has not really changed if compared to the previous survey wave. And in general, in 2023, it is in the positive zone, which reflects the dynamics of the key economic indicators that we can observe in the official statistics. If we look at the BCI index called past and present, both of them keep growing, which means that in general, the business community believes that the business activity in the country within the last 3 months and today as positive rather than negative. So it keeps improving, not getting worse. If we look at the BCI indices broken down by various activities, the landscape becomes more interesting, and we should dwell on this. In particular, we can see that the BCI indices of the present within the last 3 months as well in 3 sectors, but for trade are in the positive zone. So all companies within the last 3 months, within the last quarter, in principle, have been feeling a positive change in their business activity and in their domain. At the same time, if we look at individual sectors, then we can see that still the level of optimism about their future is worse than the optimism regarding the past. So the business community allows us to assume that the situation is unlikely to be as good in the future as it was within the last 3 months. So probably we have already left the peak of our optimism in the business community. At the same time, the current economic situation and financial standing of companies in Belarus has been showing us that starting from late 2022, the economic situation and the financial standing in the beginning of 2023 and the current economic situation of Belarusian businesses is in the positive zone, which means that this standing is rather good, not bad, and still we can see a positive trend. However, versus the previous survey wave, the change is not that significant. Therefore, we compare this with late 2022. This partially applies to the expected changes in the economic and financial situation. The only disclaimer is that optimism of the business community has been exhausted, and there's a feeling that this dynamic is going to continue in the short run. So the current dynamics is in the positive zone, but still the trend is changing now. Next, what we surveyed, we asked the business community what happens with their production and sales. And here, the situation looks as follows. Again, speaking of the 3 previous months prior to the survey, here the production and sales grew. In the meantime, production and sales are in the neutral zone, and in the future, businesses expect some growth in production and sales, but still we can see that they are not that optimistic. In the beginning of 2023, businesses expected everything would be better than yesterday, and you can see that they expect that tomorrow is going to be worse than it was yesterday. We should look at the indices. If we look at the last 3 months, we can see that starting from late 2022, the situation was improving, and the businesses would report the situation would get better and better. And in March 2023, we could see there was a peak of positive expectations regarding production and sales. One of the questions, acute questions that we posed to the businesses was about the capacity utilization. Why? Because in this quarter, Q3, was the time when the Ministry of Economy of Belarus reported that capacity utilization was 70%. We wanted to double check whether the data corresponds to what we can observe in the SME sector. Evidently, we have different samples. We can expect that the ministry mostly surveyed the state-owned enterprises, and we were focused on SMEs. Production capacity utilization is even higher in private companies. We can see this. They report that their capacity utilization is 87.4%. However, we can say that there is not a large gap in capacity utilization between sectors. So it fluctuates from 85 in the trade sector up to 88.5% in the industrial production sector. Concurrently, we looked at what the businesses believe optimal production capacity utilization is. Now, we can call it a heat map. The businesses believe that they have optimal capacity utilization, which is 100%. So you can see that optimal is close to 100% of capacity utilization. Why the gap is so significant? State-owned enterprises, mostly state-owned enterprises, that answered the questioning of the Ministry of Economy, say their utilization is 70%, and private companies say it is higher. However, we believe that state-owned enterprises, especially those that export their produce to Russia, should be fully loaded. We can say that the answer is simple. SMEs in Belarus have not become the victims of modernization or evolution cycle. Therefore, they do not have excess or excessive production capacity. So they do not invest in production just in case. So these are the figures. If we compare these with the data from Russian surveys, then this figure is higher than any figure reported by any of the sectors in the Russian economy. I mean, those sectors that are surveyed by the Central Bank of Russia. Now, speaking about employment, the most stable indicator that we have is the change in employment within the last 3 months. This indicator has been staying for a long time in the neutral zone. At the same time, if we look at the expectations, that the Belarusian businesses are quite optimistic. They believe that the number of staff will grow within the next 3 months. Clearly, this means that they expect more orders. They will load their underloaded production capacity, and they will hire more people. Now, speaking about prices, in fact, the perception of businesses and their expectations of price changes have reached the plateau. So we can see that it was in December 22 when this first happened. It was the first wave of the survey when we could observe the impact of the state regulation of prices on the expectations of businesses. Right now, the situation is stable. Businesses expect prices to grow, and within the next 3 months, companies expect that the selling prices will grow. Now, speaking about access to finance, we can indirectly use the data reported by me and Violetta and say that loose monetary policy is favorable to for access to finance, not only to SOEs, but also to SMEs. You can see the comparison with June 2022, and if we compare to June 2023, and if we compare this with the year 2022, we can see that the access to finance, in the opinion of businesses, looks as follows. It is easier and easier to get a loan at a bank, and if we look at the various sectors, then the easiest sector for that is the industrial production, because banks are more willing to give loans to industrial production sector, considering their current production capacity utilization and considering their prospects and the prospects of the Belarusian businesses. First of all, they expect that the Russian market will buy more of Belarusian products. And now, speaking about the risks, we are at the minimum level of perception of risks of doing business in Belarus. this indicator is getting closer to 3. This is our median value. Previously, when we updated our historical lows of risk perception, we would say that all risks materialized in mid-2022, including sanctions and unstable macroeconomic environment. And now this trend continues, and it makes logic because Belarus is not in the war. Everything is peaceful, and Belarus somehow cannot be engaged in these things. The Wagner Group has left Belarus, so there are no new risks seen by the Belarusian business community. And the challenges that they expected are the current challenges, and businesses cope with them. Right now, we enter the most interesting part. Speaking of risks, we understand that the risks keep falling, but what about barriers? The top one for the second wave in a row is the lack of staff. Here we grouped together. We aggregated such staff as qualified personnel and management. Almost 50% of companies say that they lack staff. And the business community believes that the number of the employed in the business community will keep growing. Still, they will observe the lack of staff, both qualified personnel and management. It's difficult to interpret. We expect that companies, private companies, expect that they will find workers by increasing their salaries. So businesses will have more costs associated with salaries, and salaries grow. So there is a feeling that somehow they will find employees. And the second barrier is challenge the supply and disruption of supply chains, disruption of logistical chains. Basically speaking, this is what is out of control of business, and this is mostly because of the consequences of the war, sanctions, and the refusal of foreign partners to cooperate with Belarusian businesses. In addition, businesses report lacking production capacity, including equipment, materials, components. This is associated with the previous challenges. This is out of control of businesses, and there is a reasonable question. Why businesses are not optimistic, or what are the reasons for them not to be optimistic? So businesses cannot control some of the factors, and they are not optimistic about these factors. And by reaching the plateau in this perception, we can say that we have reached a certain ceiling in the attitudes of business. The state policy of 2023 enabled businesses to feel well. The financial standing deteriorates, but these three factors indicate that there is a certain ceiling. Without significant transformation of the economic policy and the international situation, business will have no space to develop. And speaking of the macroeconomic stability, the stability of the exchange rate and fluctuations of the exchange rate in Q3 This was one of the key challenges. The businesses felt the change in the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble towards foreign currencies, and this is and there's also a significant factor of administrative price regulation. So businesses are under pressure of higher prices for materials, equipment components, and labor force. On the other hand, they have reached the ceiling in their prices. Right now, businesses cannot increase their prices. This safety cushion, this safety cushion shows us that the administrative price regulation becomes the key factor, and this is the factor that the government can actually, well, how can we put this? This is the factor that the government can leverage to provide additional stimuli to businesses for them to break the ceiling that they have reached. When we speak about sectors, I would like you to pay attention to the lack of management in practically every sector. So this is the topical challenge. It is less expressed in wholesale and retail trade, but still, this is a top one barrier. When we speak about the services sector, the regulation of prices becomes a challenge, and it goes up, especially in the trade sector, where this safety cushion is the thinnest, and we can see that the profitability of the trade sector has been dropping. Now, speaking about the competition and business environment in Belarus, let's look at the left graph. Speaking of the level of competition, you can see that despite the expectations that we would have less Western goods, it would be easier for us to compete because of the sanctions introduced, we can see that this has not been justified in the country. About 40% of respondents in our sample believe that now it is much more difficult to compete. This is the situation for the last year, if compared to what they used to have before. And we can see that, first of all, alternative supplies have been built. Certainly, Turkey and China substitute Western goods, and it is evident that the production cost of these goods is lower than of Western goods, and then they can easily compete with the Belarusian products. If we look at what has happened in the trucks market of Russia, when European companies left, they expected that they would have a larger market share, and then it turned out that there were other companies making trucks, companies from friendly countries like China. We cannot say that Volvo trucks can really compete, or mass trucks from Belarus can really compete with Volvo trucks, but Chinese trucks can compete with Russian and Belarusian trucks, and their features and their equipment can be better than of Belarusian trucks. The same applies to other goods. So this is a vivid example that the expectations that we would be able to substitute Western goods did not come true. If we look at the second question about the changes in the environment for doing business within the last 3 months, I marked this within the last 3 months. It's an interesting landscape. Certainly, we had a long discussion with our colleagues whether we should pose a question by saying that this is not for the last year, but for the last 3 months. So what could change within the last 3 months? Whether businesses would be able to see any changes or improvements in doing business, and it turned out that there was a difference. 40% of the sample believe that within the last 3 months, the business environment has deteriorated in the country. Especially, we can say that companies that used to export and then they stopped exporting, they believe that the situation has significantly deteriorated. So this is a prerequisite, and this can be explained by the sanctions and the toxicity of Belarus as the country of origin of goods and services for the partner countries. This is a traditional assessment of the economic situation. This is the ESI index of the current situation in the economy and the changing situation in the economy, the direction of change in the economy. We should say that there is a certain positive trend, especially if we speak about the current change of the situation. In July, companies expected the economic situation in the country would get worse, and right now they have neutral expectations. And soon this will reach the positive zone, and then the businesses will be speaking about the improvement of the economic situation. But certainly, we can compare this with 2022. The perception has improved about the future situation in the economy. If we'll break this down by sectors, then the neutral attitude to the economic situation in retail trade and industrial production is seen, and there is some optimism in the services and construction sectors. So, conclusion. If we look at this dashboard, everything looks as growing, everything looks nice, almost like in the official Belarusian statistics. They report growing GDP, low unemployment, low inflation. So this is a nice looking picture. The same applies to our dashboard. Risks are minimum. However, there is a little detail, and we could see this when we worked on this. Despite the positive perception, the business activity of Belarusian company has reached its ceiling, and now it's going to depend on whether companies can overcome and address the barriers, and whether the government can leverage the price regulation in order to change the situation in this regard for businesses. Thank you. Thank you, Radzivon. Before we proceed further, I'd like to say that our audience will be able to ask questions not only in this conference room. You can also ask them online in the Zoom chat and in the YouTube chat. We're going to proceed to the Q&A at the end of this event. This event, as well as other BEROC events, is organized under the support of SIDA. And now I'm passing the floor to Dzmitry Kruk, who will tell us about the key trends and the macroeconomic situation. Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. I'd like to say a few, two small disclaimers. Presentations of my colleagues were based on the surveys, and Anatoly and I base our presentations on the statistics. When Violetta was speaking about salaries, our situation, our description is going to be a bit different. Please be aware of this. The second technical disclaimer is very short. The data for Q3 are estimates. Part of the statistics is not available So we have to make estimates. In addition to this technical disclaimer, I would like to complain about our difficult researcher's life. Well, I believe that everybody is aware about the statistical challenge, and we live in the kingdom of absurd. And the lacking statistics is one of the elements of absurdity. But why the authorities uh, close the statistics that do not provide statistics on foreign trade and the economy? It does not seem wise. And there is no available statistics. If we make conclusions that are not fully correct, like my presentation on the foreign trade and physical volumes, then this is felt by businesses anyway. And I can assume that many people follow our presentations, and if our narratives are wrong, if these narratives impact them, then this can show negative figures. I would like to show you a large picture, and then I will break this down by elements. I would like to show you a few elements of this puzzle. And this is a traditional graph that I display. This is the GDP dynamics along the period. On the one hand, we can say that the recovery growth continued, and we can see that in the last quarter, the output has almost reached its historical high value, its peak. The second thing is going to match what Radzivon said. Was saying ceiling. So I'm going to refer to the ceiling as well. So right now we can see this. We can see that the recovery growth has been fading, and the ceiling of production capacity and the ceiling of recovery is already seen. We can wrap up and say that the recovery has been fading away, and the stagnation is coming. So this is a classical stagnation with large fluctuations, but over the 10-year period, this is a stagnation. And a little narrative about this. We cannot be, certainly we can be showing off about our performance, but we should say that Belarus is not in a vacuum. And if we compare Belarus with the EU countries, that the well-being and the well-being is the GDP per capita by purchasing power parity, and we can see that this figure is basically the same. So this is a negative trend, and this is just a chance to make it slower. And now another element of this large picture, and I will refer to figures later. We can see that the recovery growth is still there, but it has been declining. This was supported by the improving situation in the net foreign demand, and this is critical. Domestic demand at that keeps fading away. We can see this in terms of the consumer habits of households. Investment demand is quite low. So this has not left the recovery trend, and there is still some potential for recovery growth. Foreign trade, apart from the contribution to the output dynamics, is also important because this is what predetermines the macroeconomic stability. In the brackets, we can see the fight between the trends and physical volumes and price indices. On the one hand, the physical volumes, the ratio of physical volumes in import and export have improved, and we can see that this is a sustained trend. We don't know whether this will continue in the future, but right now it is stable. So the foreign trade situation has been deteriorating, and this worsens the external position, which can become one of the key prerequisites for macroeconomic destabilization. The labor market shows no significant news. We can see a regressing labor market. It was shown by Radzivon. The number of staff has been decreasing, and in employment and jobs, we can see that every quarter we go lower and lower, and the production is not stable. It varies. It goes up and down. We can hardly find any sector which can be showing some stable growth. And there are some narrower trends, the technical ones, which I'm going to illustrate. These are from the Q3, this price competitiveness. So price competitiveness continues to weaken. And again, this deteriorates the external position of the country. Exports, physical volume of it, has recovered to the pre-war levels. But speaking of the imports, it was quite unexpected to me, and I would say that this is trend number one. This has significantly dropped. Real wages continue growing rapidly. Within the last 4 quarters, wages were the driver of consumption. Not one by one, but the ratio was quite high, and this fueled consumption growth in households, but right now this ratio is falling. Therefore, consumption is not as fast as before, and we can say that the growth in consumption is at the top level, is at the ceiling. Speaking of the investment demand, we can say that salaries are translated into investment growth. We can expect that higher incomes finance this, and we can say that new jobs have updated the entire record, and inflation and nominal indicators are not going to be mentioned by me today. Now, the key uncertainties of the future dynamics, the physical volumes of exports, and I'm going to refer to figures shortly, are quite specific. Not always it is possible, if we make regression models, it is possible to see outbursts, and in Belarusian economy, we can see the administrative promotion of exports. So this is the reason of what we can see today, and we will see this in the exports chart, whether this is successful and whether it will be possible to promote exports. And I would like to say that this is a vital issue. I do not really understand within the last 2 to 3 years the changes in physical volumes of imports, these jumps and changes. Speaking of the prospects of the macroeconomic dynamics, this is the top second important issue. I'm going to skip percentage points, but the main challenge is what is going to happen to the economic policy. And speaking of the demand, there's another important thing which has been partially mentioned by Radzivon. This is about the financial standing cushion of companies and of local government budgets that actively support investments and the salaries growth. Now let's look at the details of this large picture. Let me dive into the details. We can see the blue bars, the analyzed output growth. This is like a speed of the car. Your average speed can be 60, sometimes it is 20, sometimes it is 90 kilometers an hour. So the blue bars are the speeds of a car at different moments of time. So we can see that growth is there and recovery growth continues. but it fades away. This is the situation. This is the ceiling for the macro stability and the future macro dynamics. It's important to understand that when we disaggregate this into domestic and foreign demand, why the growth is there. In 2015 and 16, there was macro recession, macroeconomic stabilization happened back then, and the growth was explained by the net foreign demand. In 2019, it was the opposite. And if the external demand decreases, then this will mean that it will be difficult to finance all that, to finance the external position. Let's look at the natural volumes. In Q3, there was a significant improvement in terms of the net exports. If you look at the data for trade, you can see that this is the estimation. And it's important to recall the disclaimer that I mentioned earlier about the correctness of all foreign economic data, because we manage to get some of the details of the statistics, and we try then to extrapolate this to the entire scope. We can see that the exports have reached what was in 2020, we called it the foreign trade miracle, and in Q3, it reached its ceiling. Nevertheless, we can see that it still goes up. Because of the lacking statistics, I'm going to refer to this for the last time. It's impossible to segregate the data by products, by geographies, by destinations. It's impossible to do that as far as the Q3 is concerned. About the exports and physical volumes have maintained. The red line is the exports, and this coincides with the physical volumes of imports. During the previous monitoring session, I marked the trend of the first half year of 2023, when imports improved significantly, and in Q3 we could see that imports decreased significantly. Speaking of the fall of the physical volumes, the situation has significantly improved in terms of the external position. But this is the very difficult trend to comment. We can see that the domestic demand continues. I have a hypothesis. I can assume that there must be some orchestration of the scope of investment and some additional levers to limit consumer imports. Maybe this is like in 2021, when import intensity was very different from its historical performance. But right now, this is just a set of hypotheses, and let's fix this fact that physical volumes of imports dropped, and the foreign trade situation has improved. However, in nominal terms, the situation is opposite. You can see in this graph, the red line is the index of conditions of trade, the ratios between export and import prices. The yellow line is the real effective exchange rate, and the bars are the indices of competitiveness. If you compare exports and imports, allows you to see that the blue bars, this variable, the blue bars indicate the condition of the external environment for domestic producers, whether it is difficult or easy for them to compete. This is what Radzivon mentioned in one of the survey questions. After a large peak in 2022, we can see that this high competitiveness of Belarusian producers has been dropping. And let's look at the index of conditions of trade. It was very close to the peak value of 2012, when after multiple devaluations of the national currency, well, it's not really critical, but there was a very good situation for Belarusian exports. I cannot say that this will get to the historical medium value, but there's a high likelihood, if we understand the possible trends for development of the global economy, there are higher chances that the trade conditions index will continue deteriorating. And speaking of the real exchange rate, there are multiple options. Let me get back. It's important to mark that we largely follow the trajectory of the Russian ruble, but in real terms, this attempt to balance between two currencies leads us to quite significant changes along the fluctuations of the Russian ruble exchange rate. This is the divergence between the real exchange rate to the Russian ruble
Recording
and the
stopped.
US dollar. So we can say that we have significantly strengthened our position towards Russian ruble, but not to the US dollar. These are real exchange rates. And now, speaking of the external position, this is a metaphor, the fight between volumes and price characteristics. Volumes play in favor of the external position, and prices have deteriorated the external position. As a result, we can see that the external position in terms of goods, if compared to the two previous quarters, has remained. But in the services sector, the deterioration trend is clearly seen, and this is because this is a deterioration of the nominal external position. However, this is not radical. Now, speaking of the domestic demand, the wages continue to grow rapidly. We can see that there is a deficit of labor in the labor market, and salaries are the drivers for the elements of domestic demand. However, within the last quarter, this driver's role has faded away. We can see the red line. This is the average wage. It's not growing that fast as before, but this has translated into the growth of end user consumption. If we refer to the textbook from the economic university, officials refer to that quite often, that the production growth, productivity growth, and salaries growth should be growing concurrently. But we can see that in the last 2 years, salaries are far away from what we can see in the GDP dynamics. This is the blue line. Therefore, there's a new trend in domestic demand. End user consumption has almost stagnated. Still, we do not have the statistics for the retail trade for Q3, and the domestic demand was fueled by investment. If we aggregate this by the impact on GDP, we should say that the green line, the main contribution, is the change in the foreign demand plus additional elements of investments in deposits and state procurement. These were the drivers of economic growth. And now, speaking of the labor market, one of the key reasons why consumption stops and why boost growth of growing salaries is not really translating into consumption now is a long-term trend to reduce employment, we can see that salaries grow, but the number of workers drops, and there are no people to consume as much. And the prospects for the economy uh, pay a lot of attention to this indicator of new jobs. New jobs is a good indicator of the transformation of the economy and the production sector. Let's look at the longer trend for 14. Let's look at the chart for 14 years. We can say that the baseline index is 100, which was in 2018, and the figures drop. This is a disaster. So the labor market is at its minimum, and this is not normal. The reasons are demography, migration, because of the various reasons, and that's the situation now. The other side of the coin is that when we have maintained the recovery growth and the number of people in the economy drops, then we can see that the productivity goes up. If you want to show off, you can refer to growing labor productivity. And now, we can say that this is also associated with the return on capital. And now, speaking of the GVA by industry, why the situation is unstable, why it is so unstable. Practically, there is no sector that would show sustained growth or sustainable growth. What this means, I mean, sustainable growth means exceeding what has been achieved before. Prior to 2022, we could see sustainable growth. And we can see that in agriculture or IT, it was the growth, but we can see in some of the sectors there's a short-term growth, but not a long-term growth. Speaking of long-term, we can see that this is more or less the same, so we cannot say that there is any good growth in any of the sectors. This is an indicator showing that this is a weak growth. Now, conclusions. I'm not going to comment everything. This is a summary. I have already mentioned all the key things. The key thing is that we have reached the ceiling. Recovery growth fades away. There are many indicators of that, and I would like to pay attention to this situation in the foreign situation. Speaking of the fight between the physical volumes and prices, and we cannot be sure that in the future the situation of Q3 will continue in the future. So this is a very risky situation. Therefore, there is a threat of deteriorating external position. This is one of the key and acute issues. Thank you. Dmitry, thank you. And now we have one more presentation left, and this will be about the inflation and monetary environment. Anatoly Kharitonchik is going to present this. Thank you, Olga. Today I'm going to dwell on the inflation dynamics and the factors of inflation, the condition of the monetary environment, and I will provide a short-term forecast for next year. If we summarize, we can say that inflation remained low in the third quarter of 23, and this is because of the blanket price control exercised by the government, which contains pro-inflationary pressure is growing in the context of an overheated economy and a tense situation on the labor market. Excessively loose monetary policy is pro-cyclical and increasingly conflicts with the objective of ensuring macroeconomic stability. If loose monetary conditions are maintained in 2024, even if the scale of monetary stimulus is reduced, inflation may accelerate to 8-10% in 2024. And in my opinion, the best scenario for the Belarusian economy for the well-being of citizens in 2024 is mild recession. If it is also associated with the expansion of the domestic stimulus. When speaking of inflation, I'm going to operate two indicators of inflation. The first one is the annual inflation, which measures the price growth for 12 months, and this indicator is catching up. The second indicator is the analyzed quarterly inflation, which measures seasonally adjusted inflation, and this is multiplied by 4 in order to show the annual inflation. We can see the price index. So in Q3, inflation figures, 6% a year. In October, annual inflation accelerated to 3.7%. The historical minimum was 2% in September, but this is largely because price decrease in October last year, explained by the new price regulation system, left this calculation. Monthly inflation in October is close to 6%, and we can see suppressed growth of the base index, consumer price index. In Q3, inflation is less than 3%. Once analyzed, in October, it accelerated to 4 to 5%, but the pace is low, and the baseline and medium inflation are still disturbed by strict price regulation, and today they cannot be seen as an indicator of sustainable price pressure. In the conditions, inflationary expectations are still low, and this means that inflationary expectations do not have pressures. If we look at the elements of inflation, then its low pace within the recent times is explained by the suppressed price growth for goods, both food and non-food. We can see this in the left chart. Goods are affected by the Resolution 713, and the services become more expensive, and they accelerate faster in a frontal way, and this applies to non-regulated services in particular. On the right-hand side in the chart, we can see that the prices for non-regulated services have deviated significantly from prices for non-foods, and this can be one of the indicators of the accumulated inflationary overhang in the economy. And we can say that there is a pro-inflationary pressure which cannot fully translate into price growth for goods because of rigid price controls. When we speak about this price pressure, then first of all, I mean the overheated economy and the rapid growth of salaries and the tense situation in the labor market. On the right-hand side, you can see two indicators. This is the output gap and wage gap. These indicators indicate the deviation of real GDP and real wages from their inflationary neutral or equilibrium levels. And you can see that in Q3, the output gap is estimated as significantly positive. This has expanded. This indicates that the economy today has excessive demand, and producers of goods and services work to the fullest. They utilize their production capacity above optimum, and this increases their costs. We should say that there is an uncertainty about the scale of this overheating and the estimate of the positive output gap. We would like to have more statistics on that, both from the National Bank and from Belstat. Still, the estimates of the National Bank and the Eurasian Development Bank say that the output gap has been significantly positive, so the economy was overheated. The same applies to salaries. The wage level significantly deviated from its inflationary neutral level. In normal conditions, This situation would significantly accelerate inflation. However, in Belarus, we have Resolution 713, which restrains the transformation of market factors into actual price growth. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that it reflects in the negative contribution. This is a gray bar of these factors. What has created the excessive demand? There are three drivers. First, excessively loose monetary policy, loose monetary conditions. Second, excessive demand in Russia, fueled by budget stimuli, and Belarus is fully dependent on the Russian economy. And the third factor is a significant expansion of state budget expenses. There's a little disclaimer. The budget expenditures, consolidated expenditures, are available for last year, broken by quarters. This year, this data is are estimates based on budget projections and the statements by the officials. But the demand in the economy is such that in order for the supply to adjust to that, it is already needed to engage production capacity at a record-breaking level of capacity utilization for the last decade, which certainly increases costs. And now, speaking of the labor market, one of the limiters on the supply side is the deficit of staff, lack of staff. On the left-hand side, I'm showing the ratio of jobless, not those who are registered as unemployed, by those that are unemployed according to the international methodology measured by Belstat. This is per vacancy. Per vacancy, there's one unemployed. This ratio has never been that low. This means there's a shortage of workers. This means a higher cost for labor, pro-inflationary pressure, and higher salaries. One of the key drivers of maintaining excessive demand in the economy are loose monetary conditions. The National Bank in Q3 did not change the refinancing rate and did not change the liquidity of the banks by standard instruments. So the banking sector had excessive liquidity. Therefore, interbank interest rates were much lower than the inflationary low levels of the interest rates. This loose monetary policy is maintained in the environment of an overheated economy and growing inflationary risk. This is a pro-cyclical situation, and this contradicts the stabilization role of the monetary policy. In the context of loose monetary policy, interest rates on Belarusian ruble deposits and loans were lower than their inflationary neutral equilibrium levels, and altogether this lead us to the interest rates that were stimulating to the economic activity. And the manifestation of these stimuli we can see in the lending market. On the left-hand side, we can see the scope of new loans. In Q3, it was close to the local peak versus the previous quarter, which is 50% higher than in 2021, which is 30% higher than last year. Nevertheless, if we look at the right-hand side, where we can see the credit impulse, which measures not the scope of new loans, but their change to GDP, then the credit impulse in Q3 was negative. And I interpret it in the following way. Loose monetary conditions, loose lending conditions support high credit lending activity, which is reflected in the maintaining high volumes of new loans. But since in the overheated economy, further expansion of output rapidly is challenging, then the expansion of demand for new loans can slow down. Nevertheless, we cannot exclude the option that this is a correctional single event in Q3 and in the following quarters, this situation will improve. In general, amid new volumes of loans, the NPLs or the loan portfolio of banks has been growing than in 2017, 2018, which was a recovery season after a long-term recession of previous years. And this high growth of lending is expressed in maintaining rapid growth of the ruble money supply. Broad money supply has been growing 5% per month in terms of money, and in terms of rubles, it is 7%, and this is faster than the inflationary growth, which would comply with the dynamics of the GDP growth and equilibrium circulation of money. And by late Q3, the broad money supply could exceed the inflationary neutral level by 10%, and this is another indicator of accumulating inflationary overhang in the economy. In the loose monetary policy and excessive demand and deterioration of price conditions of trade, the balance of foreign trade has deteriorated this year. And starting from August, we mostly have been observing its manifestation in the foreign currencies market. In August through to October, the foreign currencies market was operating in the mode of net demand for foreign currency once seasonally adjusted. Nevertheless, despite the net demand for foreign currency, the Belarusian ruble is overvaluated in Q3, and this overvaluation was shaped in June and July when the foreign currency market had net supply, and this is also explained by the strengthening of the Belarusian ruble towards the Russian ruble. This overvaluation and strengthening towards the Russian ruble enabled to neutralize increased inflationary pressure on the Belarusian market by the increasing price growth in Russia. On the other hand, Belarusian enterprises keep losing their price competitiveness in the Russian market. And for example, on the right-hand side, you can see the ratios for prices for food in Russia and in Belarus. So as many SKUs are concerned, this is not like in the pre-war period, but it is closer to what we had in 2020 and in 2021. Now, speaking of the future, the base scenario expects that the stimulating monetary policy will continue in 2024. The National Bank is likely to prioritize the support of economic activity over addressing the inflationary risks. If in 2024 inflation is not higher than 10%, then the refinancing rate will be as now, 9.5%. However, the National Bank may try to engage its indirect levers in order to control inflation. These levers can include higher requirements for provisions for banks, prudential norms that would get harsher, and the National Bank may be more actively controlling the bank liquidity because of the higher and growing risks. The number of loans can get higher, but this will be lower than the equilibrium levels of them, and this will mean that the interest rates will be still stimulating in 2024. You can see it on the left-hand side, but the scale of stimuli will get smaller. If loose monetary policy maintains, then the foreign trade balance in goods and services may be negative in 2024. This will pressure the Belarusian ruble. In the base scenario, if there are no additional shocks, this weakening will be medium, 8 to 9% against the foreign currencies basket. We should note that maintaining loose monetary policy and the current economic policy will be seen in the environment of inflationary overhang, and we will see that this will have a smaller impact on maintaining growth, rapid growth, but they will continue maintaining the output growth. On the right-hand side, you can see that the base scenario says that the economy will continue being overheated because of the domestic economic stimulation, and the output gap will be positive. This will pressure production costs. Considering the tense situation is in the market, and there's a difficult situation in Russia, and there's an expected devaluation of Belarusian ruble, so this will increase risks of high inflation next year. Next year, the authorities are likely to be willing to release price regulation because the financial standing of enterprises will significantly worsen. Therefore, the baseline scenario says that the inflation will be 8-10% next year, and this will be higher than this year. This year it is 5 to 6%. Now, speaking of the contradictions or inconsistencies, I would like to focus on one of the factors. There's a contradiction, growing contradiction between the design of macroeconomic policy and risks, because the authorities try to maintain macroeconomic stability. The problem is that if prices next year are not flexible to the change of economic conditions, if the monetary policy is excessively stimulating, excessively loose, this will accumulate inflationary overhang. So this will be a delayed potential of accelerated price growth in the future. According to my estimates, the inflationary overhang in the end of Q3 is from 8 to 8%. Look at the left graph. Without introducing this new system of price regulation, which happened the last year, inflation this year would be close to 7 to 8%, close to the target that was set by the government. And this rigid price control does not look wise. Nevertheless, we know that the government next year plans to ensure GDP growth by 4%. At the same time, our potential growth is 1%. If you look at the growth of the economy of Belarus from 2012, this is going to be even less than 1%. Therefore, the gap between them, these 3 additional percentage points, is the excessive demand that will accumulate on the macroeconomic disbalances, and this can be ensured by some horrible domestic stimulation or by importing this from Russia. If this policy continues or sustained, if the government tries to reach the target of 3.8% GDP growth next year, this will translate into significant economy overheating, pressures on the Belarusian ruble exchange rate, which is shown on the right-hand side. And if blanket price controls maintained, then the inflationary pressure will continue. Sooner or later, this will lead to a significant price jump, and the monetary policy will have to be made very strict. So this is my last slide. I wanted to show you this idea. In the context when economy is overheated and there is no space for recovery growth, additional stimulation will lead us to a situation when economy overheating output gap may expand to 5%, by 5%, and we can could see it prior to the crisis of 2009, 2011, and prior to the crisis of the second half of 2014 and in early 2015. Yes, excessive stimulation in 2024 may mock the improvement of well-being and incomes, but in the future, devaluation and disinflation and inflationary factors will not only break all those achievements, but this will deteriorate the well-being of citizens. Therefore, I believe that for the Belarusian economy, the most favorable scenario for next year is a soft recession, close to 0.1%. This is a green line. If this soft recession is accompanied with gradual normalization of the domestic policies, if the monetary policy becomes neutral for the economic activity, this will be the best way. Soft recession will enable the economy to get back to the trajectory of positive growth with the smallest losses for the accumulated outcomes. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you have any questions, please use microphone. We're going to check whether it works. The second microphone for the audience. In the meantime, I have a few questions asked in Zoom. It looks like, I'm reading it out loud, it looks like that the imports in 2022-23 was temporarily high. Can it get lower? Can it get closer to the neutral levels, maintaining growth or its contraction? Will this become any driver of growth in next quarter? We can assume anything. What I said today is as follows. The external trade is very unstable for Belarus. And if we look at the pillars, there are main pillars and secondary pillars in external trade of Belarus. And if we speculate, there are various committees to promote exports. So there is no economic logic behind the growth of exports, but the practice shows that there can be non-economical logic that can affect foreign economy indicators. Speaking of imports, it can be more interesting. In 2021, we could see this when imports were lagging behind. It's very sustainable and technologically justified coefficients and intermediary imports. So this is what is used for production. Last time I marked that the outburst growth could be explained by a significant share of imports going to Russia through Belarus. Maybe this impact was not that significant. Maybe this is even weaker today, but this is the conclusion. There are many explanations of what could happen to imports, so I would not exclude the scenario which you presented in your question, but I wouldn't say that there are too many reasons for that. I would like to elaborate more. Speaking of exports, physical volumes of exports keep growing. Speaking of services, services dropped and they're very low if we look at the IT sector and at the transportation, at the transit of cargoes. And if we speak about the exports of goods, the processing industries ensure that, and we can say that today production capacity works at its fullest. We can say that in the production sector, this is the record-breaking figure from 2017, and If we look at the potash fertilizer, which is in Belarus, they produce less than prior to the war. If we look at the optics and electronics sector, if we look at these enterprises that largely depend on the Russian military-industrial complex, they are fully loaded. So they can continue producing as much as today if the demand is that high. However, catching up growth sticks to the productional limitations because the production capacity has been fully utilized. Okay, do we have any questions from the conference room? Lev Lvovsky has a question. I have a question to Anatoly. You recommend to introduce soft recession next year, then we will feel safer. But the average GDP growth rate is 1%. But so what's the difference between pumping the growth to 4% and then having 1% in the next 3 years, or having 1% a year every single year? So we are just changing the planning horizons, and then the ultimate figure will still be the same, either whether the economy is overheated or not. Thank you for your question. Well, the outcome will be different because if economy overheats, this brings us to crisis, as we could see in the past, and this will have negative consequences. If now we get back the economy back to the equilibrium growth, then we can avoid negative consequences like abrupt devaluation, inflation, and rigid monetary policy. So this can be done smoothly if we get back to a more wise monetary policy. Thank you. Thank you. There are more questions from Zoom. Olga Simashka has a question about the labor market. In these conditions, how the authorities can address the issue of a lack of workers. Lev Lvovsky said he is ready to answer the question. Well, within the last couple of months, authorities have been saying that they would like to address the labor market. They don't want to do anything about demography, but they want to expand the practice of obligatory job placement. They have introduced it for health workers. So the authorities have ideas of further expansion of this practice. In the short run, this can decrease the deficit of labor resources. But on the other hand, we can see that high school students will be emigrating from the country, trying to avoid job placement. What are the key factors leading to sustainable lagging behind of the living standards in Belarus if compared to the neighboring countries like Poland and Lithuania? Well, this is a result of stagnation. I would say that this is the trajectory of balanced stagnation. This is what we could see within the last decade, and then all institutional deficits bring to this. The living standards are based on the long run, long race. We are just lagging behind in this race. Our economy does not generate growth, and then our living standards deteriorate. Thank you. We have a few more questions from Zoom. If we do not have any more questions from the audience, I would like to read them out loud. Labor productivity grows in Belarus faster than in Russia. Maybe this is the reason why Belarusian ruble is getting stronger versus the Russian ruble. Who's ready to answer? We could see the strengthening of the Belarusian ruble towards the Russian ruble. I'm not sure that this is associated with the growth of productivity. In the Russian market, there's a specific situation today. They have a higher demand for some goods, and Belarus has these goods. First of all, we speak about military industrial goods, and maybe we speak about the production of cars and trucks. China has not seized the Russian market fully. This is whether this is going to be sustainable. I doubt that this high export growth rate can be maintained in the future. A few more ideas. If we look at the exchange rate, we should look at the general factor productivity, labor productivity. What I could show to you, this is an ad hoc phenomenon. This is the strengthening explained by a very severe shortage of workers. So this is not a real growth of labor productivity. This is an ad hoc phenomenon, and in the long run, if we look at it, we will see that this will be minimum. Speaking of the general factor productivity, then there is a deficit of it. Therefore, we should not be speaking about any linkage between labor productivity in Belarus and the strengthening of the Belarusian ruble towards the Russian ruble. These are short-term monetary things, but there is no significant trend of association with productivity, in my view. The same person says about how overvaluation of Belarusian ruble, whether this can be devaluate and whether this can strengthen maybe because of the external demand. Let me refer to my graphs. Speaking of the association between the overvaluated Belarusian ruble and the export dynamics, we should realize that, as I said, exports grow due to a number of specific reasons, and these sectors are associated with the military-industrial complex. These sectors are less sensitive to foreign currency fluctuations. The same applies to oil refineries and potash fertilizer producers who simply recovered their lost volumes of production, which they lost last year. Therefore, overvaluation of the Belarusian ruble will nevertheless have a negative impact on exports, but today it is absorbed by these specific factors. Olga, could you please repeat the second question? As said, right now, if we look at the graph, the overvaluation of Belarusian ruble is insignificant. In general, we can say that indeed the exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble is close to its equilibrium level, but probably it's a little bit overvaluated. We can assume that this is not a critical disbalance. Some degree of uncertainty may remain. Thank you all. As far as I can see, we do not have any other questions. We are wrapping up our presentation. Thank you all for participating in this event online and in Vilnius. I'll see you in the future. All the best to all of you. Thank you.